Hello, everyone. Welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Friday, November 1st, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about Robert Zemeckis' latest movie, Here. My name is Ben Pearson. I'm an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor and chief film critic, Chris Evangelista.
Hello.
All right, Chris. So let's get right into this movie. Let's talk about some general thoughts about the film before we get into spoilers. What did you think about Robert Zemeckis' newest movie?
Yeah, I go into every movie hoping to like it. Like I don't go into a movie being like, I hope this sucks, because I don't want to waste my time. But at this point, as we discussed in the Robert Zemeckis episode, any new Robert Zemeckis movie comes with a bit of hesitation. And of course, there is the idea that this movie is using AI to digitally de-age people, which is like immediately gives me pause. However, I thought the trailer for this looked kind of good, and I also thought the basic setup of the movie, which is that it's one. It's not like a one take movie, but it's a one shot movie, in that the camera never moves from one place. It stays rooted in one place for literally millions of years. I was like, that's an interesting idea. I want to see how this turns out. So I went into this hoping it would be like a return to form, or at least something good from Robert Zemeckis after a while. But I did not like this at all. It just, I think it's an interesting failure, but I still think it's a failure.
Okay, you said in our Slack that you thought the movie was watchable, and I think
Right.
that's a great word for it. I would never say this was a great movie, but the unusual structure that it has, I found to be like a really fascinating thing, because it gives you the feeling that anything could happen at any time, because the movie, like you said, cuts back and forth across all these different time periods, and the camera is in a fixed position the whole time. Largely, it's following the story of Richard and Margaret, who are played by Tom Hanks and Robin Wright. They're reuniting with Zemeckis and Eric Roth, who co-wrote this script after they all worked together on Forrest Gump all those years ago. And so they're sort of the core story, but it's cutting back and around in time to like a bunch of different stories that are happening. And I
And
found that,
sometimes it's like the same different time at once too, which I thought was interesting. Zemeckis has this thing which is borrowed from the graphic novel that inspired it, where there's little like frames within frames, like little boxes that show like something happening like 100 years ago while happening at in the present of the timeline too. So
yeah, it's almost like a picture in picture type effect or
right,
something
yeah,
over certain specific aspects or portions of the screen that are relevant. Like a TV could be on and like the Beatles are playing, when Beatlemania happened on the Ed Sullivan show, and then that was in the 1960s, but the rest of the action in the frame could be happening in whatever 2003 or something. So yeah, those moments are there's a sort of interactive quality that Zemeckis has had, that the movie has, where Zemeckis is like playing with time in this interesting kind of way. So like because of that, I've never really seen anything quite like this before, and it gave me the feeling that anything could happen at any moment, really. Like there's just no way to track this story in a traditional sense of like, oh, I bet I know what's coming next. I mean, maybe you could guess about some of the family drama or something that was taking place in some of the story. They like lay seed for example, the Tom Hanks Robin Wright relationship starts to crumble at a certain point, and you can kind of maybe tell a little bit of where that storyline is heading, but you never know what is literally going to happen on the screen next, except that it's going to be from that fixed angle. So it's a really just kind of interesting experiment. I think you called it an experiment in your review, but
yeah.
okay, so there are several aspects that I wanted to get into. I wrote down the digital de-aging thing. I'm not really sure about the AI aspect. There is AI used to do this, and the way that I understand it, Zemeckis teamed up with this company that kind of helps essentially create a digitally de-aged version of whatever the camera is looking at in real time. So he could see on the monitors while he was making the movie young Tom Hanks walking at age, 20 or something, walking into the frame. And my understanding is that he didn't have to wait until the visual effects sort of post-production process to see what that would look like. So I'm like largely, I don't know, I think it's fair to say that I'm largely against AI in creative
Right.
use cases or whatever these days. I don't really know enough about it to be able to weigh in on that fully, but yeah, it is worth mentioning that they made a big deal about AI being used in this way. And I'm not sure if this necessarily like took jobs away from visual effects people who otherwise could have been employed to work on this. And I don't know. There's like a whole quagmire with AI that I just don't feel knowledgeable enough about to really weigh in a smart way. So maybe we can set that aside. But like, I was curious what you thought about the actual end result. The digital de-age versions of Tom Hanks and Robin Wright specifically. What did you think they looked like in this movie?
I think it really, and I think this is just digital de-aging in general. I think it really varies from moment to moment. I never found it like terribly. I was never like, this looks terrible, but it never looks real. Like everyone is very smooth looking, like it's very smooth skin, and there are certain moments that really take you out of it. Like there's a moment where Tom Hanks's character reveals that he just got Robin Wright's character pregnant, and his father, played by Paul Bettany, is like, "You're only 18 years old," and like I immediately like snap out of the movie because it's like Tom Hanks is not 18 years, like Tom Hanks is in his 60s, like, and even though he's digitally de-aged on the screen, it just look like your brain like immediately clicks, and you're just like, "Oh, this is odd. Like this is like weird to look at." And there's another moment like even before that where Tom Hanks is even younger and he's like sitting on the floor as a kid, and they like pitch his audio up to make his voice higher, and it's like I just find these things distracting. Like I don't like, they don't like enhance the story, they take me out of it, and that's like the opposite of what you really want. Like I'm not against digital de-aging. I think it can work. I think like The Irishman is a great movie, and while there are like a few shots in that movie that are a little questionable, I think the digital de-aging works in that movie. Like the only objection I have to digital de-aging is when it's used to bring the dead back to life. Like with Alien Romulus is the most recent example, how they brought back Ian Holm. And like, even if I don't care if like the family is like, we approve this, like unless the actor himself or herself approved it before they die, it rubs me the wrong way. It's just very weird and creepy. So like that's the only issue I have with it. Otherwise, like it's like anything else. It's a tool. I think it can be used in the right way, but I don't think we're quite there yet. And I feel like it's best when it's used sparingly. I get like, again, I just got done saying I think it works in The Irishman, so who am I to talk? But I don't know. I don't want it to become like a normal thing. I don't want it to be like every movie has this now, because I really do think you can do de-aging without this technology. You can use makeup, or you can cast younger actors. And, so
I'm pretty much right there with you. I was very worried about it from the trailer, which is just, when you're watching other things and then you click over and watch a 2-minute trailer on YouTube or something, I think the effect stands out a lot more than it does in the actual movie, because I think for the most part, I kind of forgot about it, and it worked the way that Zemeckis was intending. But yes, there are these moments like the one you pinpointed there, where it just becomes really obvious and the whole thing sort of snaps, and the whole illusion kind of falls apart a little bit. But I think ultimately it looked okay at the end of the day. I just kind of wish that it wasn't a thing, really, which is like not a constructive criticism, I guess. But okay, so we're about to take a break and get into spoilers in a little bit, but without really spoiling anything, Chris, I was kind of shocked, and you say this in your review, like there's this recurring theme of time passing and people missing out on dreams that they had. I was kind of shocked at how sad this movie is. And it's basically the film version of that old quote, life is what happens to us when we're making other plans. And there's this really admirable ambition in terms of the scope of this movie and what Zemeckis seems to be trying to do. And I've got to give it up to him for doing something I've never seen before. But I was kind of surprised at how sad and depressing at times this movie was. So what did you think of like the overall feeling that the film left you with.
Yeah, I think this is one of the film's biggest problems. Not that it's sad, it's that I don't think Zemeckis has the right grasp on the tone the movie should have. Like, the movie tries very hard to be like uplifting and funny, and I find that really clashes with like the overall message of the movie is very, it's just bleak. And I don't have any problem with bleakness. I think life in general is kind of bleak. Life is a depressing thing when you get right down to it. And I kind of like, I'm of two minds of it. I appreciate that the movie takes the time to underscore that like people really often have to give up on their dreams. Like there's a, like the Tom Hanks character wants to be an artist and he has to give that. I don't think this is a spoiler. I think it's like part of the plot. It's not really a spoiler. He has to give up on that dream because he has to raise a family. And I feel like a lot of people have been in that situation where they're younger, they have a dream of doing something grand with their life, and then life kind of just gets in the way of that. So I don't have a problem with a film depicting that. If anything, that's accurate. That's what life is like. But the tone of the movie is so off. Like, even like the last scene is trying to be this like, look at how poignant this last, and without giving away spoilers, because we're not in the spoiler moment, it's a bleak final scene. The whole movie is just really upsetting. Like, and there's like all these like little things in the movie that the movie doesn't really even touch on that much. It's kind of just like the house is literally built on like an Indian burial ground. Like, what is this? Like, what? Like that? Like, I feel like that's like something the movie doesn't really address at all. It just glosses over it. And there's these moments where it feels like Zemeckis and Eric Roth, the screenwriter, are trying to like hammer home these serious moments, and they don't match the rest of the film. And the whole movie begins up feeling like schizophrenic in a way. It's like I don't think that like anyone here has a grasp on the movie that they're trying to make. And I think that's really what hurts the film.
Okay, I actually want to continue this thread, but I do want to get into spoilers. So we're going to take a break, and then we'll come back and get into spoilers for Robert Zemeckis' Here. Okay, so yeah, I think you made some good points there. And I think as the movie settles in, I thought it was going to be about the ups and downs of life and the joys and sorrows and the victories and losses. And like, if you watch the trailer, it has this sort of like ebullient music, and it really gives you this feeling that like, you know, gee whiz, everything's going to be okay. And it seems like the balance is off in this movie. It seems like there's much more sorrow here than joy, at least in the Richard and Margaret storyline. And so, yeah, but especially by the end of the movie, like, let's just go ahead and jump straight to the end. Like the Alzheimer's subplot with Margaret is just so sad. You know, I was like openly weeping at the very end when she's remembering this moment that they had together in this house after initially not remembering their wedding or really any other details of their lives together. And I found it to be this just really just incredible, like gut punch, emotionally resonant thing. But just because they found a way to make me cry doesn't really mean it's a great story, you know? Right. So I was wondering what you thought about how the movie ended.
Yeah, I also, for one thing, and this is another problem the movie has, it's very clumsy in how it drops. The whole movie, I'm like getting ahead of myself. I'm tripping over my words here. So the nature of the movie kind of dictates that it's like wall-to-wall exposition. The whole movie is like characters have to literally announce what's happening because we're constantly dropping in and out of timelines. Like a normal narrative, a normal new movie would allow that stuff to flow organically. It would be, delved out over time. But because this movie is deliberately jumping around in time and it's all set in one spot, it constantly has to have characters like announce what's going on. Like there's a part where they're like, I can't believe our daughter's going to college. And then like a minute later, they're like, I can't believe our daughter graduated college. And it's like, this is so poorly. And they keep dropping hints about Robin Wright's character's Alzheimer's by like, there's like 4 different moments where she's just like, I can't remember what I was doing. And it's like, this is so like ham-fisted and poorly handled. And you get what they're going for. It's like, obviously she has Alzheimer's. Like, they never actually flat out say she has Alzheimer's, but you understand that's what's happening. But it's so clumsy. And then you have this big finale where it's not even like it's like a bookended thing. Like, at the beginning of the movie, you see Tom Hanks' character as an old man come into the house that has just been, it's up on the market, so the house is empty, and he sets up two chairs. And then the final scene brings this back where old Tom Hanks brings in old Robin Wright, and he's like, "Do you remember we used to live here?" And she doesn't remember it, and it's like, it's sad, but it didn't like affect me in the way it should have, because everything is so awkwardly done. This is a very awkward movie, and it never finds its footing, and it also like it cheats a lot. And this really bugged. And like, I say this in my review, but all movies cheat. All movies are fake. You know, all movies have a layer of artifice. They're all set designed a certain way. They're all blocked a certain way. They're all directed a certain way. Like, every movie you've ever seen has this artificiality in it. But good movies make you not notice that. Like, you're like wrapped up in the world. And with this movie, I'm constantly noticing how fake everything is, because they have to continually find ways to keep us in this one room. Like, there's a funeral in the room, and there's a wedding, and someone dies, and then there's a baby born. Like, all this, and I'm not saying that's not realistic. Like, I'm sure there have been rooms where all that has happened at once, but it never feels natural. And there's all this like, there's this like run. Do we want to talk about like how there's like multiple timelines and stuff? Like, there's this multiple. Yeah. So like, the house. Not only do we see the house like millions of years ago with the dinosaurs, and like we see the house before there was even a house there, where there's like indigenous people living on the land. The house is built in 1907, they say, and the first people who move into it are this woman and her husband, and they have a baby, or like they have a child, and the husband is like a pilot, and so they're constantly talking about him flying his airplane, and they keep doing this thing where the wife is like, "You're gonna die in that airplane," and this like, it shouldn't be funny, but like, it eventually cuts to the guy's funeral in the living room, and there's two people talking, and they're like, "I can't believe he died in a plane crash," and the other guy's like, "He didn't die in a plane crash. The influenza got him." It's like, what is this? Like, why are they like announcing this? It's so like poorly handled. It just really bugs me. And then there's like this couple in the 20s who invent the lazy boy, which is like, I hate, this is like my least favorite part of the movie, these two, because they're constantly like dancing around the living room, and they're like perpetually horny for each other, and I just hated these characters so much. Like, every time the movie cut to them, I was just like, I hate these people. Like, duh. Like, they're the only like happy people in the movie when you really stop and think about it, but they bugged me the most. Like, I just did not care about them.
Okay, so man, there's so much to talk about here. So this movie is based on a graphic novel which came out in 2014. So the thing about I've not read this, and I don't think you have either.
No, I have not.
But the thing about the pilot dying of influenza, I think, is supposed to be a link to what happens later in the movie, when after Tom Hanks' character and Robin Wright's character move out of this house, we see that a black family has moved into the same house in sort of modern day, or much closer to modern day than the rest of the story takes place. And COVID is happening. At one point, their maid dies of COVID. And so I think that's the only reason that the original thing was there. And I can't imagine, if this book was published in 2014, that was meant to be a parallel that was drawn, because obviously the pandemic hadn't happened yet. So like, what is the reason? I don't know.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
And I was just going to say, a lot of these subplots just feel not even half baked, like quarter baked. There's just nothing to them. It's kind of, a lot of the subplots feel like they're just there to stretch out the overall runtime or something. Like, there's not, you don't really get a good sense of the dynamics between the characters, or like the why of any of the characters' decision making or anything like that. In the way that you watch the the Richard and Margaret storyline, you understand those characters because you spend so much time with them that you're in their headspace. You get where they're coming from. You see their life experience happen. But then there's these other subplots, like the Lazy Boy one, where it's just a guy who invented the Lazy Boy happened to live in this house. And I
Right.
guess the takeaway is kind of like amazing things are happening all over the world, and like sometimes good things and bad things happen in the same place, which I don't know. There's something about this movie that it just feels like its reach it exceeds its grasp, or
Yeah.
whatever that phrase is, where like I get kind of what Zemeckis is trying to tap into, which is like this feeling that it doesn't have to be this fixed point. This movie just happens to be showing us this particular fixed point, but you could move the camera to any other spot and any other part of the country, and you would get another series of stories going back a million years of amazing life and love and joy and happiness and like all this kind of stuff, and sorrow, and all these human experiences happening through this prism. And there's something to that. I just think the execution is not really there in this movie. I thought about like, sorry, one last thing. I was just thinking about when I moved out of my apartment that I was in LA for like 10 years or something, and moved into my house. Like I remember leaving my apartment and being the last person to close and lock the door behind me. And it was this empty space. And I'm sure this is a normal feeling that people have, but when you look back in that room as you're leaving it for the last time, you just think you're all the stuff flashes across your mind of all the memories that you had in that space, and so spaces are like very important to us as humans. And some of that I think is what Zemeckis is trying to get into, but maybe it's a combination of the fact that you only see one room in the space, and like it kind of strains credulity that all of this stuff, like you said, births and deaths and all this stuff would happen literally within this exact frame. I don't know. There's just something about it that didn't quite click. Sorry, I was talking a lot there.
No, that's all like dead on. And I think like the problem when you like boil it down to is like, what is this movie about? Is it about the space? Is it about the house? Is it about the characters who lived in the house? Like, I feel like the movie doesn't portray any of these things the way it wants to, or the way it's trying to. And it's like, look, I'm not like saying like, it drives me crazy when people say like, why did this scene happen? It didn't advance the plot. Like, I don't think movies need to operate like that. I don't think every scene in a movie needs to advance the plot. And I feel like if you look at a movie like that, you're limiting yourself. Like, that's an argument that gets thrown out a lot with like sex scenes in a movie, where it's like, this sex scene didn't advance the plot. It's like, it doesn't have to. Like, you shouldn't look at art that way. Now, that said, the way this movie handles its various threads, it doesn't seem to understand what it wants to say about any of them. And it's like, I feel like they needed to like do a better job of nailing this down. Like, they needed to either, one, focus entirely on Richard and his extended family. Like, start with Paul Bettany and what's her name, Kelly Riley, moving into the house after World War II, and end with Richard bringing Robin right back to the house at the end. Like, if it was all that, that's like a tight, concise movie. Or if you want to do the thing where you say, look at all this stuff that happened in the house over hundreds or millions of years, they needed to devote almost like an equal amount of time, almost make it like an anthology movie, where it's like, you get 30 minutes with this couple, you get 30 minutes with that couple, like sort of like even it out. Because the way it is presented here, we spend the bulk of the time with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright, that everything else sort of feels weird and off kilter. Like, there's like a running subplot about like Ben Franklin in this movie, which is like ridiculous. Oh my God. Like, the very first shot, not the very first shot, but the beginning of the movie, there's a shot of a guy in a carriage from far away, and he looks a lot like Ben Franklin. And I was like, is that supposed to be Ben Franklin? I was like, no, they're not going to do that. And then later in the movie, he shows up again and it's like, oh, that is literally supposed to be Ben Franklin, and it's like a jump scare. Like he just
Yeah, he lives in the house across the street from the main house. So
yeah.
like the camera is looking out this window and you see this old colonial house, and that's where Ben Franklin's son, I think, used
He's
to
like, yeah,
live.
one of his illegitimate sons lives in the house, and it's like, what is going on here? Like, why is Ben Franklin in this movie at all? Like, I don't. And they do this in such a clumsy ass way too, where like this Ben Franklin's son is like, trust me, in 100 years, no one will know who Ben Franklin is. It's like, stop it. Like, what are you doing? Like,
yeah, the dialogue is pretty rough. Yeah, I actually wrote that down. I think the line was, in a year's time, no one will remember the name Ben Franklin. And then it cuts to Richard and his brother doing dueling Ben Franklin impressions at a Halloween party in modern day, or like whatever, the 90s
the
or something.
60s,
so, and then there's this other line that I wrote down in the very beginning of the movie, when they're building the house. These two kids come up and one of them's like, that's a big hole. What are you doing? And one of the construction guys is like, we're building a house. And then one of the other little kids is like, down there? And then everyone breaks into uproarious laughter, like this kid just killed at a comedy club or something. And I was like, man, this dialogue is rough.
Yeah,
like,
the whole movie is filled with stuff like that. There's a part where I like Robin Wright. I think Robin Wright is a really good performer. I found her really bad in this because for some reason she's like shouting all her lines, it felt like to me. And maybe it's just because she's like forced to deliver the most exposition. But there's a part where their daughter does something and she's like laughing, and it's like the most unbelievable laughter where she's like in hysterics.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, this is not that funny, Robin Wright's character. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't, and the whole movie is just filled with these moments where characters are like cracking up at jokes that aren't funny. And it's like, I don't buy like a single line of dialogue in this movie. And that's a problem. And it's like, again, I don't need dialogue to be realistic. I don't need all movies to have realistic dialogue, but there's got to be something for me to grab hold on, and everything in this movie just feels really forced and clumsy. Like, honestly, I think the only one doing good work in this movie is Tom Hanks, and I think this like goes to show what a good actor Tom Hanks is, but he's the only one who finds sort of like a subtle note to play. Everyone else is really dialed up. Like Paul Bettany is really dialed up to 11 for some reason. I mean, I get it that he's he's supposed to be an alcoholic and stuff like that, but he's like really laying it on thick. And it's, I don't know, I just found everyone really like just too much. It's like too much. But it's like, at the same time, like, I feel like I could talk about this movie for another like 2 hours. And I feel like that has to count for something. Like,
yes.
I think, like I said, I think it's a failure, but it's a very interesting like when I saw Welcome to Marwen, I was like, this is like one of the worst movies I've ever seen, and I never want to think about it again. Whereas this movie, I think this movie is bad, but is bad in a fascinating way. And I kind of appreciate that. I kind of like, I got to give it up to Robert Zemeckis for trying something with this. I don't think he succeeds, but I just find that like almost every choice in this movie, it doesn't work. But I find that interesting.
I feel the same way about Trap, which, is another movie that like we've talked about to death, so we don't need to like rehash all of that. But it's a similar kind of thing. I mean, this is obviously like formally more daring, but I feel the same way. Like, I don't really know if I can say that I like the movie overall, but I feel like I could talk about it for a long time. There's just like something fascinating about a lot of the choices being made here. So just to piggyback off what you're saying, I think Tom Hanks actually is really good in this. I think Robin Wright is better than you make her out to be. I think she, I don't know, maybe her character isn't quite as well-rounded, but like some of the, and it's kind of tough just watching this marriage kind of deteriorate before your eyes, and like you understand why Robin Wright's character is so frustrated, because she feels trapped in this house, and like Paul Bettany's still there and everything, and it's not the most fun thing to watch when you have these characters like Tom Hanks' character is obsessed with taxes, and like they're constantly arguing, and that's what I mean about like the balance being off of the movie, because there is this kind of like swelling music, and like some of the stuff just doesn't really click in the way that I think they meant it to, because the intensity of these arguments outweigh, to me as a viewer, outweigh the whatever light moments or moments of joy that they seem to have, that we are privy to in this movie. And so I think, like you said, if we had spent more time with them, maybe that balance would have evened out or something in my view. But because there's such a bitterness in this movie, and I think that's kind of that's one of the main things that Zemeckis is getting at here, is like this idea of, I think he's trying to inspire the audience to take life and not just put off your plans, and
don't let it pass you by, basically.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's just the way that he goes about doing that. It's entertaining, it's fascinating, but it's not I don't know, it's not easy to watch, I guess, which is like, I don't know, I guess I'm not asking to be like, to turn my brain off and be spoon fed or something, but I don't know. There's something weird about this movie. And I guess bringing it back to Robin Wright's character, like, she does finally get to, she spends a lot of the runtime complaining about her circumstances, basically, and like yearning to like break free and have Paris. Individuality and all this stuff. And yes, go to Paris. And she finally does get to go to Paris at the end of the movie. But because the camera is forced to stay in the same place, we don't get that sense of elation and sort of catharsis that she must have felt. So we just hear her talking on the phone to Tom Hanks's character about how she went to Paris and it was an amazing trip. And like, that's not the same experience that, for an audience, to watch all of the hard stuff and then only hear about the good stuff. So I don't know, maybe that's part of the reason why the balance was a little off for me.
No, I think that's dead on. And it's like they're limited by what they can do, because they have this setup where it's one shot in one spot. And that's both really cool. I think that's a really cool idea. And also it kind of goes to show that you really can't make a movie like that. I imagine this idea works really well in the graphic novel. Like, I'm sure it works much better in like that sort of medium than it does here, because they're just different mediums. And it's like, I think it's I don't want to use the word brave because that's like going too far, but I guess it's bold to try this. Mm-hmm. Hats off to Robert Zemeckis for trying it. But I think the end result is it just doesn't really work for a movie. I mean, the idea, that artificiality, going back to that, like, the fact that it's also just one room and the camera angle never changes, it makes it never feels like a real living room. It feels like a set. And it feels like a TV set. It's like you're watching Friends, where the camera is shooting into, Monica and Rachel's apartment. It's like, it's that one shot. And like, even Friends, though, the camera angle will change. Like, never changes here until it does at the end, which that really bothered me. Like, I was like, why? What's the point of moving this now? Like, what? I don't get it. Like,
I think the reason that the camera moves there is because it sort of like spins around these characters, the Richard and Margaret, and then it goes out the window and it kind of like elevates up and just shows you that this house is one of many on this street. And I think it's meant to just underline that idea of like, the story that you just saw was the camera was fixed in that particular room, but by showing this expanse of New England, I think we're meant to think you could put a camera anywhere and this kind of the same kind of human majesty would be would unfold before our eyes, kind of thing. But
for all we know, a much better movie was happening next door.
I kind of like couldn't help but think that sometimes, like when the movie stumbled, I did find myself wondering, like, oh man, I wonder if the story happening right next door was a little bit better than this one.
Or even in another room, like in the upstairs bedroom, there's a much better movie going on up there, but we'll never know because we don't go up there.
So one of the things you said in your review was you kind of alluded to like maybe Zemeckis hinting that the house could be haunted in some way. And I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if this is me like just dreaming this up, because I think that would be a better movie. But like not only does like there's a scene where like Tom Hanks's kid comes in dressed like a ghost, and they're like they all run around the house laughing about it, which is again like, ugh.
I don't
But
know. Maybe real quick, maybe because you and I don't have kids, Chris, like some of those things kind of came off as eye rolly to us, and maybe parents
no,
like
I'm sure it's
totally vibe
great.
with
I'm
that.
sure
Yeah.
if you have a kid and your kid comes in dressed as a ghost, you're just like, this is delightful. But to me, someone who will never have children, like, I don't care.
Okay.
But like, I don't know. There's just like this undercurrent of like some sort of presence in the house, and not only like there's literally a funeral for some guy in the house, the pilot guy, and then someone actually dies in the house, and like who's to say like is this camera angle like is this like a point of view like someone's point of view is someone like who is watching these people like
Right.
obviously it's us the audience but it's like this one spot is like so much history has happened here who's to say like there isn't something like hovering around the margins but again that could be me like just me like imagining it like at one point I thought he was gonna like go full out and be like there is a ghost in the house I was gonna like hell yeah this movie rules but no it does not happen.
Well, there is this one moment where I think it's Paul Bettany's character is kind of he's taken ill and he is resumed residence in this house. I think he and the Rose character, the his wife, the Tom Hanks's character's parents, have moved to Florida, and something happens where Paul Bettany returns to the house, and I think Rose has died,
Right.
and it does that picture in picture thing where Rose is in the middle of the frame and then from years before, and then Paul Bettany in quote unquote modern day is on the couch behind her, and Rose like either knocks something over or does something. I don't remember exactly what the action is, but then the picture in picture disappears, and it's almost as if the Bettany character like is responding to what happened years before in real time.
Right.
And that is kind of a haunting in a way, you know, like
Yeah.
there is something to that. And then I didn't even really think about the Indian burial ground kind of aspect of it. I mean, they do have characters from like an archaeological society come in and pull this necklace out of the backyard that was like we see in a prominent shot early in the film from these indigenous characters that are visible in the frame. But I didn't really think about that. But I think you're right that maybe there is something to that. And the movie is not really interested in that. But I think there is a read of the film where that could be a through line, you know? So
and that's a much better movie. They should make that movie. Like,
it sounds like it could be similar to what Steven Soderbergh is doing with Presence. I don't know if
right.
you've seen
Yeah.
the trailer for that, but yeah, the camera is moving in that one. That comes out in January, I think. So
Yeah.
if you're interested in that concept, it seems like that's what that movie more taps into. But okay, so just a couple more things, Chris. I was wondering about the transitions in the film. Like there's this moment where water is leaking in the roof and then the scene cuts to a pregnant Margaret's water breaking in the living room and then her giving birth right there on the couch. What did you think about I guess for lack of a better term, the editing of this movie, the pacing of the movie, like the way that it decided where and when to cut to these different storylines?
Yeah. I had a problem with this. I don't mind the parallels where it's like this happened once and now it's happening again. And, you know, I like that in theory. I feel like the movie doesn't stick to one thing. Like for the bulk of the movie, they're doing that picture in picture thing, which I think is a neat idea. And I feel like that's what they should have just kept doing. But sometimes they'll do this thing where like people will literally fade out of a frame and they'll like fade back in and they'll like vanish from like they'll like pop out of existence, but the shot will stay the same. And like it just feels too it feels like they were like they picked one thing, the picture in picture thing, and then they were like, oh, this won't work. We need to quickly invent something else really quick. And I feel like they should have just stuck with one thing to make it more like consistent, I guess.
Yeah, there are moments where the whole screen kind of flickers or melts or something, and then there's
Yeah.
this transition, and it's like that is only used sparingly throughout the movie, and it's kind of like, well, why did you use that here?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
not
Like why
other times.
yeah, why are you allowed to do this now? And like that's not like there are rules, like you can do whatever you want, but it's like within the grammar of the film, it doesn't really make sense. It's like you can't introduce this technique and then immediately it'd be like, oh, we also do this sometimes. It's like
Yeah.
it feels like it's cheating. It's like, make up your mind. You do one or the other, or do them all consistently, sort of thing.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've complained a lot about this movie, but there are moments that I think genuinely got to me. Like there's a line where Tom Hanks says in this sort of regretful apology that he gives to Robin Wright's character, he says, "In some insane way, I must have believed that worrying would keep painful things from happening." And there's just a lot of really relatable stuff that happens in this movie. And like I said earlier, it's not always fun to watch, but it is the human experience in some ways. So, as kind of clunky as a lot of the dialogue is, there are these little moments. And there's this speech that Margaret gives at her 50th birthday where she talks about all the regrets that she has, and like she never went to Paris and she never did this and all that kind of stuff. And like, everyone in the room is kind of looking at her like she's breaking down and going insane. And that must have been what it felt like for those characters in that time. But we do actually get to spend enough time with Margaret that the accumulation of all of the circumstances that she's had to put up with over her life just kind of spill out in this big speech. And so that moment didn't feel as clunky to me as some of the other dialogue in the movie. And then the fact that she does eventually get to go and live out her dreams and stuff like that, even though it's later in life, is kind of I was happy for that character that she got to do those things. So like the movie worked on me on that level. There are just so many other points where I was distracted by either the bad dialogue or all the other things that we talked about. So I don't want to make it sound like this is a complete whiff. Like I think there are aspects of this that work and like ideas that are really interesting to think about. But yeah, just in terms of like the final execution, I think there was a lot to be desired for me personally. So any closing thoughts about this before we wrap it up, Chris?
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I mean, I don't think this is a good movie, but I do think it deserves some attention. Like, I think it's worth watching once. Like, I don't think like it's worth like ever like I got to revisit this in a few years. Like, I don't think it's going to be like reclaimed or anything like that. But I do think it's worth seeing to see someone trying something with this format. I just don't think the format really works, and I wish it did. I wish I'd come out of this like I really like that, but it's like, and like the first like 2 or 3 minutes, I was like, I'm okay with this. I think it's going to be okay, and then it just slowly. I think the moment where they're like, down there, you're building a house in that hole, and everyone guffaws. I was like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. And
well,
it just
let me ask you this as a way of closing. I'm thinking of the movie Unfriended, the Screen Life movie from a decade ago, and how Searching came out, I think, 4 years or 2 years after that. And I think sort of built on that sort of screen centric format in a really interesting way. I wonder if you think this could be a technique that other filmmakers use that might work better with a different story. Like maybe part of our problem is just this particular script as opposed to the way that the story was told. So I wonder if you think that there could be potential for the story next door, or not actually taking place in like the here cinematic universe, but other filmmakers tackling this, utilizing this as a way to tell their own stories.
Yeah, I do think that's a good point. I do think you could find a way to make this work. I just feel like it requires more, I don't want to say effort, but it requires like a different sort of approach. Like if we're stuck in this one spot, I need to know why we're stuck in this one spot, I guess. I feel, and I'm not saying like we need to be stuck in like the most momentous room in history or anything like that, but it's like I feel like there's a way to do this, and I feel like the best way to do it, honestly, is what I said earlier, where stick with one family, show them from the beginning of their family to the end of their family. Like, don't cut around to the lazy boy couple. Don't have Ben Franklin pop up. You don't need any of that stuff. Like, keep it rooted in one particular family's story, and I feel like that would be a better movie. And I Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that would be just as bad, but I do feel like it would feel a little more focused, I guess, and a little less like what is going on with all this other stuff. Like why are we spending so much time with the man who flies his airplane? Like I don't like what is this? Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, totally. Okay. Well, I'm going to link to Chris's review in the show notes so you can read his thoughts about the movie there. And that's going to do it. I would back up what Chris said. I do think this is worth watching one time just because it's so interesting. And I do like the idea of like supporting directors who are taking chances. And this is technically IP because it's based on a comic, but it's not IP in the way that we think of like modern Hollywood IP. So I do appreciate the swing, certainly, from Zemeckis. So yeah, that'll do it for today's episode of the show. You can find more about this film and Zemeckis and Tom Hanks and Robin Wright's previous movies at slashfilm.com. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you all next